for you to come on, don't think too much of yourself. If I could come up with the original vine, you ain't much better than that. So yeah, we are part of that holy nation now because we've been grafted into that vine. A spiritual house, especially for Asia Minor, they were building temples to Roma, the goddess Roma. And Caesar was a god in there, the emperor worship. So Christians, where's your temple? Show us your temple to Athena. Show us your temple to Roma, to Saturn, to Juno, all those things. We are the spiritual house, the royal priesthood. And why? What are the things that a priest is supposed to do? Offer spiritual sacrifices and proclaim the glories of God. What do you have for your translations? Chapter 4, verse 10. We talked about translations and different translations and how people have to do their best job. Before you tell me what your translations are, once you have it open, I'm going to read to you the interlinear Greek. So my Greek, I can't just read Greek, but I got an interlinear Bible, so I can parse it out. So this is what the Greek scholars have to work with to translate. What we have is proclaiming the mighty acts of him who called us out of darkness. This is what it says, Greek word for word. So as the virtues you may tell out of the one out, you having called into the marvelous light of him. That's Greek word for word. Now, how do you take that? So as the virtues you may tell out of the one out of darkness you have called into marvelous light. So work with that. Now, as a Greek translator, turn it into something people can understand. Remember I said the NASB, King James, they're often wooden because they try to go word for word literal, but it doesn't flow in regular English. NIV does a better job of that, but it tries to stay true to it. The Peterson Bible just kind of says, well, here's the idea. So what do you have for that verse? Proclaiming the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness. Anybody tell me what they got?
Verse 10?
Yes. Or verse 9. Verse 9. You're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare what? The back part of verse 9.
The praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light.
The praises of him that called you out. Okay, what else do you have? First, no, 2.
Oh, you said 4.
Yeah, you did.
Oh,
Why does it make this so much?
I did say 4.
yeah.
With the touch fit and not.
When I was a rookie preacher, I laugh at myself all the time on this. Little country church, about 35, 40 people there to start with. And I'm saying now, what was the major thing that Peter kept saying in this passage? And no one's blinking. And I'm thinking, who are these? What do they have? No Bible knowledge at all? What kind of congregation I've been saddled with? And I repeated to myself, and there's silence. A little lady says, "Did you mean Paul?" Yes, I meant Paul. What was Paul trying to say? We're like, yeah, I get what you're talking about. Chapter 4, don't know what I'm talking about? Okay, how about chapter 2, verse 9?
But you're not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are a kingdom of priests, God's holy nation, his very own possession. This is so you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light.
Okay. The phrase I'm interested really is that's the last part of that. To proclaim the mighty acts or declare the praise, that phrase. The New Revised Standard Version says, proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. New American Standard almost the same. It says, proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and marvelous light. So they just changed one word. For mighty acts, they prefer the word excellencies. King James says to show forth the praises of him who called you forth. NIV says to declare the praises. But other than that, King James and NIV are the same. They say show forth instead of declare. The rest of the phrase is all the same.
What's it in Greek again? That phrase?
Yeah, okay. So that the virtues you may tell out of the one out of darkness, you having called into the marvelous light of him. His marvelous light. So the virtues is literally the Greek word for virtues. You may tell as his excellencies, mighty acts, his praises, virtues. You may tell out as proclaim, or show forth or declare, out of darkness into his marvelous light, wonderful light. See, there's little nuances, not a whole lot, but there's a difference between virtues and excellencies and mighty acts. And each one of those devoted scholars said, no, that's the best word for that phrase. Okay, that's kind of just an example of how complicated it can get. But what we are is a chosen race, spiritual house, royal priesthood. Offer spiritual sacrifices. We've been talking what's essential for church the last 4 weeks. Spiritual sacrifices. You don't know what to sacrifice if you don't know what God wants. Instruction. How do we please God? How do we offer these spiritual sacrifices if we don't know what God wants? That's why we have instructions. The fellowship is sharing, is proclaiming the glories of God with each other, sacrifices for each other. All right, that's proclaiming the glories. Now, remember who Gandalf is? When? Yeah. Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. One of the Hobbit, I guess the Hobbit or something, says to Gandalf, "Oh, Gandalf, I just wish we weren't here. We'd have to deal with this." His phrases. These are the times given us. We must decide not whether, but how we will face adversity. Like, wow, is that a prophetic mark for the days that we're in right now? The days of Christians are in. And the days the Christians in North Korea and China and Russia and have been in for decades. And Peter's talking to a church in Asia Minor that's going into that. He was already in Rome. As I said before, in Rome, Nero was sacrificing Christians up in a pole, cover them in pitch, and light them up to light up his garden parties. That's what Christians in Rome were doing. And he's saying to the church in Asia Minor, yeah, these are the times given. We decide not whether, but how we face adversity. Things to remember. I'm kind of overview here. And this is the deal with the it's tempting to deny the necessity of suffering. And especially, I think it's true in America because we've been so blessed. If you've been getting the Voice of the Martyrs, and I hope you do, and I've got a copy for every person on the board, a 50th anniversary or something edition to give you. The suffering is necessary. Peter's talking about this, and the persecuted church around the world says, well, yeah, Jesus said we'd suffer. It's necessary, but it's tempting to deny that. It's easier to believe in a Christ who delivers us from suffering than a Christ who delivers us through it. And there's the name it and claim it theology. God wants you to have good things. God will bless you. If you're true to God, he will bless you with all kinds of material wealth and prosperity. That is not the God of the Bible. He will deliver us through it. So how should we behave in such circumstances? It's on us now. 4 years ago, there was a whole movement of people saying, not my president. And now there's a whole bunch of people saying, not my president. How do we behave in circumstances that, what is the Christian attitude towards undeserved punishment and suffering? it's my unscholarly, my hunch that things are going to get worse for Christians as the years roll on. Not that we're particularly targeted because we're Christians, but because we're not going with the main flow. So you can be an atheist and not go with the flow and be targeted. You can be a Christian and not go with the flow and be targeted. We're going to be targeted not because we're Christians necessarily, but because we're not going with the flow. We're not, nothing personal. There's a woman in our Bible study named Flo, so there's nothing. Yeah, so what's our attitude towards this? What's the attitude towards suffering? And how can we cope with being alienated from society around us? It's going to become more and more. I think, again, as Americans, we're insulated. And I think in South Central Pennsylvania, we're insulated. And in Elizabethtown, Mountjoy, we're insulated. But on a state and federal level, we're not going to be insulated. So we're going to be dealing with more in that. And I picked First Peter before the elections even came about and all of these things happened. But I thought, wow, for what is going on in people's, mostly from two different kinds of newspapers I get, one's liberal, one's conservative, and Facebook, it's like there's a lot of stuff going on. And are we going to cope with being alienated from society around us? The center part, that C, is who we are. Okay. Now, well, that's the last one I had. I'll just leave that up there because that comes along. Going to the C part, offering spiritual sacrifice. Okay, we did all that. Go to verse 10. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Once you were not the people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
That finishes the heart of who we are. Do you remember where that comes from? Anybody off the top of the head? Hosea, the minor prophet Hosea, chapter 1, verse 10, and chapter 2, verse 23. Can someone pull that up quick? I don't know if you. Because Hosea was talking about the Jews. Oop, let me go back there. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 1, verse 10, chapter 2, 23.
1:10. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In places where it was said of them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God.
We were not the people. In those places, there will be. And then in 2:23,
I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called, not my loved one. I will say to those called, not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God.
if you have King James, it might say your name was Lo Ru Hama. Now you're Hama. And then Lo Ami. He has two children. He names one not my people, the other one not loved. I think great child.
Yeah.
Here's my kid. Here's Lo Ami. He's not loved. But then your name will be Ami, loved by God. So he's quoting back to that as fulfilling prophecy. The Gentiles who follow Israel's king, I can read my own writing, became part of restored people of God. Isaiah 56, 3-8. Isaiah 56, 3-8. While someone's doing that, Isaiah 19, 23-25.
Isaiah 56.
Yes, 3-8.
You read?
Yes, please.
Blessed are those who are careful to do this. Blessed are those who honor my Sabbath days of rest by refusing to work. And blessed are those who keep themselves from doing wrong. And my blessings are for Gentiles too, when they commit themselves to the Lord. Do not let them think that I consider them second-class citizens. And my blessings are also for the eunuchs. Eunuchs, they are as much mine as anyone else. For I say this to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath days holy, who choose to do what pleases me and commit their lives to me. I will give them in my house, within my walls, a memorial and a name far greater than the honor they would have received by having sons and daughters. For the name I give them is an everlasting one. It will never disappear. I will also bless the Gentiles who commit themselves to the Lord and serve him and love his name, who worship him and do not desecrate the Sabbath day of rest, and who have accepted his covenant. I will bring them also to my holy mountain of Jerusalem and will fill them with joy in my house of prayer. I will accept their burnt offerings and sacrifices, because my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations. For the sovereign Lord, who brings back the outcasts of Israel, shall I bring others too, besides my people Israel.
Wow, that's a lot in verses 3 to 8. But how many times did Gentiles come up in there? And honoring the Sabbath, another plug for the Sabbath. Isaiah 19, 23 to 25. Okay, go ahead.
In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, sorry. The Assyrians will go to Egypt and the Egyptians to Assyria. The Egyptians and the Assyrians will worship together. In that day, Israel will be the third, along with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing on the earth. The Lord Almighty will bless them, saying, "Blessed be Egypt and my people, Assyria my handiwork, and Israel my inheritance."
The Jews were the chosen people, the Assyrians, the Egyptians were the Gentiles. In that day, all three are going to be blessed by God. Romans 9, 24 to 26. How did Jews miss that in the Old Testament? How did they get themselves thinking they're the only ones and the Gentiles are out? God's prophecy said it's all at once. Romans 9, 24 to 26.
It's 9:24.
Even us, whom he also called, not only from the Jews, but also from the Gentiles. As he says in Hosea, I will call them my people who are not my people. I will call her my loved one who is not my loved one. And it will happen that in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God.
Okay. I just wanted to emphasize that because, again, this is a central part of 1 Peter, who we are. I've said this before about us being ambassadors. If you're representing a country, then everything you do in the world you're assigned to represents that country. You can't go out in public and do something like get in a fight, get drunk, or whatever, and not have it reflect on your nation. We're ambassadors, so as a royal priesthood, offering sacrifices to God and telling people about the glories of God. That's what we're supposed to do. How do we do it? That's what we're moving into next. And part B and B prime on either side of the central idea tells us how to live. Verse 11 in chapter 2. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. Foreigners is a word that keeps coming up again. Resident aliens. Yeah, that in your translations?
Strangers.
Strangers and aliens.
What is a resident alien, and how does that compare to the rest of society?
When I lived in England, when you were transferring back in and out of the country, you know, they had those lines for citizens. You must go right through. If you're not a citizen, you can't go right through. You have to go through the other line. To be the alien, you have to have papers. It shows you're an alien.
That's the third time. Yes, thank you. That's the third time he mentions this. The very beginning, he's God's elect, exiles scattered throughout provinces. Exiles, foreigners. Exiles is the same word those exiles. And then in chapter 1, verse 17, live out your times as foreigners here in reverent fear. And then again here in chapter 2:11, I urge you as foreigners, resident aliens. In their culture, and I think it's kind of true in the world today, the locals get the greatest respect, the locals get priority. Then you get the resident aliens, the ones who are legally here, been here a while, but they're really not locals. And then you have the newcomers. The Jews were the resident aliens in Asia Minor. They've been here a long time, but they're certainly not locals. We saw this up in the coal region. You could live in one of those cities for 25 years and you're still a foreigner. You weren't born there. You didn't go to school there. And if you're born there in school there, you knew everybody's second cousin, aunts, uncles, and you that went to school with them, or, you know, that was the locals. We know a woman was married to a guy for 15 years and she still feels like a foreigner up there because she wasn't born there. But still, she got better status than us coming as newbies from Lebanon area. Newcomers are really suspect. So that's where the Jews were. They were in the middle right there. They were never anything like the locals in Asia, but they were resident aliens. They've been there a while. They don't have all the respect and treatment that the locals do, but they're still treated better than others in that status. Live as foreigners, resident aliens, exiles. Abstain from sinful desires that wage war against you. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds, glorify God on the day he visits us. How would that translate for today? Who are the pagans? It's going to sound rude, but putting it bluntly, who are the pagans?
Hollywood.
Hollywood? How about your neighbor who's an atheist? How about anybody who doesn't believe in Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior? You're either on the inside looking out or the outside looking in. So conduct yourselves as good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, oh, these homophobic Christians, oh, these racist Christians, oh, these bigoted Christians, oh, those Bible thumping Christians, all the other monikers you put on it. Media, you mentioned Hollywood. How does media portray Christians for the most part? Is someone in a movie is a Christian or a preacher or a priest?
Arrogant. Wow.
Pedophile, if he's a person in authority, or adulterer. I mean, just throwing it in the face. This is how we're portrayed. Seventh Heaven. I don't know how that stayed on the air as long as it did. They were like decent folks dealing with stuff and getting through it, you know. But that's generally not how we are portrayed in the media. Why is that? What is it that sets Christians apart from culture? As far as they're concerned, forget Jesus Christ for a moment, because they don't care about Jesus Christ. What is it about us and our lifestyle that just doesn't work with the Hollywood culture, with mass marketing and advertising and all the stuff that drives media? You didn't figure this out before?
That's all about self and bettering yourself.
Because you're not good enough.
We're not newsworthy.
Now, if you get whiter teeth, people will like you. You're still wearing that. That's like so last year. If you get newer clothing, you got to buy new clothing. You got to get whiter teeth. You got to get that new car. You're 5 years old. Oh, come on. What's wrong with you?
Show more skin.
Show more skin. People will like you if you have the right tan. You know, you're not good enough, but you buy this product and you will be. And you know what? Pay for it later. Just get it now. No interest for 2 years. Buy now. Buy now. Christian says, no, you're not good enough, but whiter teeth ain't going to change that. Your clothing ain't going to change. You're still not good enough. So that ain't going to make a difference. A good financial counselor will tell you live within your means. A Christian counselor will tell you live below your means. Live on 90% of your income. Give 10% to God. God will take care of you. Do not go into massive debt. Do not buy now, pay later. If you can't afford it, wait until you can. That doesn't play well with advertisers and consumers. And what drives newspapers and magazines, TV shows is the advertising. I learned this years ago in a literature class, way undergraduate school, not literature, a newspaper journalism class. When they lay out a newspaper, they put the ads in first. Then they figure out where the news articles go. Because the advertisers are paying for the paper. And to get you to buy the paper, you need to have this urgent need to see what's happening. So they have to create a crisis. And that's why, you know, that old phrase, dog bites man, no story. Man bites dog, that's a story. One child gets abducted off a bus, front page news. 27 million children get off the bus every single day, not news. It works on hype. And Christians go, that is horrible, but that's not life. And I can trust people, and there is good in the world. And I can live without the new car. And I can live below. That just is oil and water to a culture of advertising marketing. So, like I said, for a moment, forget Christ. We're resident aliens because we don't buy into that mindset. Well, we're resident aliens if we don't buy into the mindset. I'm all for having decent clothes. I mean, I don't want to walk around in tatters and stuff. We are not in this world. We're not of this world. We're in the world. We're not of this world. We will never be accepted unless we buy into the commercialism. It's okay to have a Bible cover. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of good friends I know have them. But you have the newest and the greatest version. There's new stuff coming out all the time. Jackie, I recommend this. Sorry about this. The Cultural Backgrounds Study Bible, when it came out, it got 2000. That was great. Really recommend it. She was looking for one. There's like, what, 5 different versions of it out there? And we were trying to compare, well, which one is, I don't know. They have so many varieties. It's like, really, do you need 7 different versions of a cultural context Bible? You forget the hard copy, soft cover and all that, but the stuff inside, we couldn't figure out which one is really better. We can get sucked into that real quick. What's the catalog we get from Christian? It's got all the bookmarkers and the
DVD, resources. You talking about that one?
It's not just Christian resources. It's got bookmarks and placards and papers and
CTA.
coffee mugs and all this Christian stuff that you can buy. You can spend hundreds of dollars on stuff that's dust catchers.
Yeah.
But it's cute, but it's Christian. It's consumerism. And it's easy to get sucked into that. We're aliens here, we're strangers. So if we live such good lives against culture, they can accuse us of all these doing things, but they'll have to admit that's not us. Barbara's got a good story about that because Europeans have an attitude about Americans. You want to share that?
About the lunch?
No, about who you are as an American.
Oh, having lunch with some friends.
Yeah, it was lunch. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, co-workers, and it was a lunch, co-workers lunch. I was the only American around the table, and they were playing Dash Americans, and I just had it up to here. And those guys had met Phyllis, they'd met Lydia, they'd met Rose, they'd met Dan. And I said, okay, you've met these guys, you know me. I'm sorry, I'm still getting ticked out. And I said, are all Americans like that? No.
For those of you at home, she's hanging her head. They were going, no, she's not.
Because I've never met Americans. I mean, the TV Americans are the Cagoule family that goes down the street with their matching Cagoules.
Yeah,
And
Dallas was a
they
hit. I
didn't
mean,
know.
when I was over in Europe, I mean, people thought we lived like they did in Dallas. That's what they saw on TV. That's what Americans live like. We all have new homes, and you know, even Bewitched, those TV shows. Like Americans are just rich. We have all kinds of money and all the soap opera stuff. What do they know about America is what they see on TV. They think we're all like that.
And we're ignorant because we're not, I'm sorry, never mind.
Well, now, some of that is true. We're Americans over there, it's embarrassing. But as far as, so go back to here, that when they accuse you, your good deeds will glorify God. If somebody who's accusing Brenner of being a bigoted, ultra-conservative, unfriendly church, what would the neighbors have to say about that? How have we impacted our neighborhood, our culture, where we can say, no, wait a minute, you know us. Is that what you know about us? You personally know us. Do they personally know us? Why not? How long have we been here? How many of our neighbors don't know really what goes on inside of here? How many of our neighbors we don't know? I'm new here, so I'm in my house, but do we know our neighbors around here? Do we know how many single parents there are? How many widows? How many, are we impacting our neighborhood? Should we be? You guys down in Maryland too, I've been talking to you too. Yeah, so they'll see the good deeds and glorify God. That's one of the things I like to advertise once a month, what we do for New Life for Girls, for Gideons, for Scouts, for all the different ministries that we do. Anybody who watches goes, wow, they're not just for themselves, they're actually doing something good. But leading into that, this chapter 2:13 through 3:12 basically says, if you live like this will undermine all the bad things they're saying about you as Christians. So he gets into this next description of how slaves should live, how wives should live, how husbands should live. This is basically all the things we were being slandered about. We being back then, our brothers and sisters back then. These are the things culture was saying about them that was negative. So this is how you respond to those. 2:13. Submit yourselves to the Lord's sake for every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to command those who do right. For it's God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Submit to every human authority. How far does that go? You got the Bible thumpers. It's in the Bible, so they're right there. Put your mask on. It's in the Bible. Go get your shots. Governor said to do it. President said to do it. At what point do we say no? Was that okay? Cultural context or universal? Are we talking about early on understanding these letters? What is it that was culturally true for them but not true for us? And what is it that's universal?
I think it's universal.
Okay. Other thoughts? If we're saying it's universal, then shouldn't we be doing everything the governor and the government tells us to do?
It's respect them, it doesn't say follow.
Submit to every human authority.
Mine doesn't say submit.
Okay, what translation is that? Just curious.
It does say submit.
The Peterson
But that's
Bible.
way
maybe
back
you
in 13.
Yeah, verse 13. Anybody have anything else?
Pastor Brian.
Wave your hand.
Pastor Brian,
Yes.
since in our country, we are supposedly allowed to protest peacefully and supposedly have freedom of speech, would that mean that it's okay to express our feelings or our thoughts or views rather than just submitting to authority?
it's not only okay, it is the responsibility of every citizen to do that. I wonder if you could even just repeat what you just said, because I think there's a lot of people were thinking that too. Because we live in.
You want me to repeat it?
Please.
Yeah. Because here in the United States, we're supposed to be able to peacefully protest and speak our views and have freedom of speech. Does that mean that in obeying our authorities, that it's okay to do that, to stand up and speak freely?
Yes. Very, very good question. And then my response again is not only is it okay, it's our responsibility to do that as citizens of a republic. People forget we're not a democracy. We don't live in a democracy, even ideologically, theologically, whatever. It's a republic. That means there are certain standards that are set up, and this is how we will govern. And a 51% majority doesn't change the rules. It's a constitutional change, a majority, a bigger majority than that. That's the difference between a republic and a democracy. We live in a republic. So there are certain things that are just laid out, like freedom of speech. And if 51% of people say you can't have freedom of speech, that doesn't change the Constitution. That means there are people subverting the Constitution. And it's our responsibility to resist that as citizens.
Bonhoeffer spoke out against Hitler.
That's a great example there of what's going on nowadays today in North Korea and places around the world. The most recent article, most recent publication of Voice of the Martyr, there was a guy in Iran who was a police officer and he accepted Christ. Well, his wife was totally got all kinds of trouble going on, reported him. His boss called him in, they interrogated him, beat him up, there are all kinds of things. And finally, when he wouldn't recant, they said, okay, fine, just don't tell anybody about it. Be a Christian, just don't proselytize. Which of course he has to, because who are we? We're service and sacrifice, a spiritual sacrifice to God, and proclaiming the good news. That's essential to what it is to be a Christian. But if, as long as you keep your mouth shut, don't tell anybody, you're okay with it. He can't do a whole lot in Iran. That's religious dictatorship. In America, we're required to. In Germany, we just watched The Hiding Place. Heartbreaker movie. If you haven't seen that, Corey ten Boom. It's a hard movie to watch. We were thinking, maybe for a Saturday night. It's like, no, it's not a Saturday night movie. But it's worth watching. Because what they're facing in the Netherlands, the Dutch were facing the same thing that I think we'll be seeing here. When certain things, it's very telling, but at the beginning of that movie, near almost the very beginning of it, the Nazis are coming through the streets with a wagon and they're calling out everybody's radios. Give us your radios. They were taking everybody's radios from them. Why would you do that? Why would you take someone's radios? Control media. And you control what people hear, so you control what people think. Does that have a familiar ring to it today? How do you respond to that? And the Ten Booms did a beautiful thing. They hid Jews, which was against the official edict. And this, we've heard, we know this before, we've heard this before. First, we are Christians. First allegiance to Christ. Second, we are responsible patriots. Yes, submitting to authority, but not if it goes against God. But do you have the moxie to do that? Will you stand up against wrong? Barbara.
To be done in love,
Yes.
not arrogant, but to be done in love.
We are charged with responsible cooperation. How did we get in this mess? Again, I said this from the pulpit, it's this last election, 40% of Christians in America didn't bother voting over the years. Presidential elections, every 4 years, 4 out of 10 don't bother to vote. And you think we're in a mess today? Why would that be? Is there any government that's out of God's control? Oh boy, I wish that didn't happen. What happened? I was watching for a minute and then I took my eyes. You think God ever says that? When God was talking to Moses, he said about Pharaoh, I put him in charge for a moment like this. What you see him doing, I'm still in control of that. You know, I'm a tree hugger. I've been for a long time, taking care of the environment, creation care. What have we been doing to our planet? Historically, since the Industrial Revolution. Now we're looking at an administration which is very much into ecology. And it could very much hurt business and a lot of jobs, and a lot of industry could really suffer, but it might just be giving the land the rest that we haven't been given. Now I'm trying to stay as apolitical as possible, to read the different opinions about stuff. On the one hand, if the ecologists prevail, then there's going to be less pollution, less garbage. It's going to hurt the economy, very possibly. It may create new business. I don't know. But what if God's saying, you guys have been messing up. I've given you enough slack, enough. Now, my land is going to get some rest, and y'all are going to suffer for it, but my land's going to get some rest. Do you think these people are doing it because they honor God and they care about creation, care and God's beautiful environment? No. You think Pharaoh cared about God? Do you think the Babylonians cared about God when they hauled everybody off into exile and the land had its 70 years of rest? God was working through things that was horrible for the people receiving it, but less than they deserved. I wonder if we're not getting less than we deserve in America, because 4 out of every 10 Christians didn't even bother to make their opinions known. And the Christians that did vote, I mean, how often have you voted with your Christian conscience as opposed to what's politically astute or along party lines or general opinions about economy and things like that? I couldn't tell you the last time. Yeah, I'm getting political, and I hope I'm not. Anyway, just one last thought on this. I couldn't tell you the last time that I was aware of a real Christian who ran for president since Jimmy Carter. And we got elected, the press, they were going out of their minds. What on earth is a born-again Christian? Never heard of a born-again Christian. What is that? They had to go try to figure out what a born-again Christian was. Since then, I don't know anybody that hasn't used their religion as a political tool. So are we getting what we deserve? Maybe we're getting less than we deserve. So what is our response to that? Responsible cooperation. What happened in Germany? What happened with the 10 booms? They paid their taxes, they did what they were supposed to, but this I will not do because that violates God. And they stood up for that. And there were different layers of that. And this is something that's really interesting we need to think about, because there were those who were openly opposing to it, and they had to go underground. The French resistance. They were blowing up trains and cutting down communication lines, and if they were caught, they were executed immediately or sent to jails or tortured, whatever. They were out in the open defiance to the Nazis. And then there were the people who kept the businesses going and looked for all the world like they were cooperating with the Nazis and getting information and feeding it to the underground. For a lot of people, they might have looked like collaborators, but they were spies. So when things start getting really nasty, and this has nothing to do with the next 4 years and who's in office now, I think 4, 5, 6, 8 years going down the road, things are going to get nastier. And there will be people who will be openly defiant, and they'll get arrested and eventually have to go underground. And then there were people who will need to supply these people with materials and goods and aids. And if they're openly defiant, they won't have access to things. Corey Ten Boom goes to the one guy who's in charge of food rationing. The Ten Boom family is putting up like 15 people, I guess. Seven people at a time. And there's food rations for 3 people. So they go to the guy that they know is a food ration guy, and she basically lays out what she needs. His response is, well, how many ration cards she needs? She said, 100. It's like that. Well, the only way that could happen is ration cards are delivered on a certain day. Now, if I and my clerk were bound and gagged and robbed, then, well, that would be a horrible thing, wouldn't it? And they move on. How are Christians going to respond? That's what 1 Peter's about. The heart of it is who we are. Responsible to God, responsible for the goodness of God. Part B and part B prime. How do we live under those circumstances? How should we behave? What's our attitude towards undeserved punishment and suffering? The preacher that got hung in Germany by the nuts, Bonhoeffer. I think Bonhoeffer had this quote. He said, first they came for the gypsies, and we didn't really care because we weren't gypsies. Then they came for the gays. We didn't care because we weren't gay. Then they came for the Jews, and we didn't really care because we weren't Jews. Then they came for us, and there's no one left to care. When did we get active? When did we start doing something? And how did we go about doing it? Undeserved punishment, undeserved suffering. How do we cope with that? That's what these passages are about. So again, where there's cultural context, understand who he's writing to. The Christians were being accused of being wrong in what they were doing. So, yes, honor all people as worthy souls. It may be very tempting to pass along those Facebook memes, insulting and making fun of people you don't like. But as a Christian, is that the right thing to do? Are we honoring all of God's people as worthy souls that God died for? Do we pass along a mocking image of somebody else? Cynical contempt, sneering disdain. Jesus kind of said that's as bad as murder. If your evil thoughts towards someone. Be very careful. We don't get caught up in this culture of hysteria. Submit for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Okay, I think we covered that one. It's a huge thing. And it may be hard for you to recreate this tomorrow. You know, how's the proper response? Kathy, you said it beautifully. Thank you for raising that question. Yes, we are responsible. If we do nothing, then we're sinning. If we see evil going on in a world where we have the ability and the authority and responsibility as citizens to do something about it, and we sit by and do nothing, we're sinning. James said, for you who know what you're supposed to do and you don't do it, to you that's a sin. So how do we honestly, in all grace and love, resist evil in the world, wherever we think it's coming from? One of the things coming up is with this split, they knew that other major denominations had split in the past. And the people we're kind of affiliated with, they went to these different denominations and said, what happened? How did you respond to this? How do you deal with it? Most of them hadn't a clue. There was one group that had a plan. So how do we deal with Christian persecution in America? Look around. There's a Christian persecution going around the world even now. How do they deal with it? There's a clue. There's people who have gone before us that already know how to suffer for their faith. This is how they do. Get Voice of the Martyr. Get Open Door, those things. Slaves. In reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only for those who are good and considerate, but those who are harsh. For it's commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering. Do we know anybody else that bore up under the pain of unjust suffering? All the way to the cross? How is it your credit to receive beating for doing wrong? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example. This is what the people in the persecuted church hold on to. When they're being beaten and tortured and driven out of their homes and homes are burnt down, endure it. It's commendable before God. He committed no sin. No deceit was found in his mouth. They hurled insults at him. He didn't retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. One of the things we read about India, the Hindus love to persecute Christians because they don't fight back. They're an easy target. The Muslims will fight back. You attack the Muslims, they'll attack you. Christians, they're an easy target. They don't fight back. What a philosophy. He himself bore the sins in his body at the cross. He might die of sins, live for righteousness. By his wounds you've been healed. You were like sheep gone astray. Now you have returned to the shepherd, overseer of your souls. But it's not fair. Yeah. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your husbands, so that in any of them don't believe the word, they be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. These are first generation Christians. The wife may have accepted Jesus Christ and the son hasn't. The husband hasn't accepted the son. So how do you live with that? Regardless of all the slander against Christians, live such good lives that maybe they'll be won over. You might be the only Christian in your family. There might be someone in your family that's not a Christian. You got nothing but snarky remarks for Christians. How do you deal with them? How do you win them over? Let me see your period of reverence. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment. Okay, which has elaborate hairstyles and wearing of gold jewelry and clothes. Rather, it should be inner self of unfading beauty, gentle, quiet spirit. Does that mean women aren't supposed to be wearing attractive stuff?
Yes, he says,
What?
NASB says merely.
Merely, okay.
Should not come merely from outward.
That's an editorial fix. Because word for word, you shouldn't come from outward adornment. Is that what it meant? That Bible translator said, no, here I'm going to throw this word in because that's a better understanding of what the author meant. You have different translations, anybody else? That would be chapter 3, verse 3. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as. What else do you have there?
don't be concerned about the outward beauty that depends on fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, or beautiful clothes.
So don't be concerned, just don't bother combing your hair or putting on makeup. Okay, I'm emphasizing this because there are certain Christian sects, denominations, whatever, that don't allow women to wear jewelry or they have to cover their hair. Is that what he meant? No. Cultural context there. What's the universal application about that, though? Don't be overly concerned about that. Excuse me. Yes. Please wash your hair, comb it, wear perfume, please. You know, nothing wrong with the jewelry. But in the culture, what makes a woman beautiful? All that stuff. So the universal application is don't buy into the culture. Beauty. Husbands, in this verse 7, in the same way you consider your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, as heirs with you in a gracious gift of life, so nothing will hinder your prayers. That gets the dander up on a lot of women. What do you mean the weaker partners? Weaker sex, I think King James says. What's cultural and what's universal? We're almost out of time here for this one. Cultural context. It was just known. It was understood. Even women didn't dispute this. Women did not have a head for business. They don't have a head for education. They can't be educated. They just can't do these things. All right. Now, also their culture, the man would be about 16, 18 years old, maybe 20, and he marries a girl 12, 13, 14 as soon as she gets to puberty. How smart is she compared to an 18-year-old, 16-year-old? A guy who's already got his business going on. Were they educated? No. Why weren't they educated? Because they're not smart. Why would you bother educating them? They can't understand it. It's a rare exception for a woman, especially Roman, to be educated, to be able to handle business like that. It was just understood that they weren't. So what he's saying, have mercy on them because they're the weaker sex in that sense. Their cultural context said they couldn't understand. Does that apply for today? Certainly not. What's the universal application for that? How many times has a guy said to a woman, "Oh, suck it up and take it like a man"? Broad strokes. Who's more emotional, the women or the men? Who sucks it up? Generally the men. Who's had to in the workplace for most of the time when women were raising children. Men had to deal with these jerk bosses and this stuff. Just suck it up for the sake of, that's been an understanding. Now this weaker sex thing, I do this in premarital counseling. Take an old clay pot like you might have in the yard, similar garden thing, and a nice piece of china, crystal china. Which is the weaker vessel? The china. Which one of those is put up on a pedestal for display? Which one is treated with kid gloves? All right, men, treat women like that. Treat them like fine china, like the weaker vessel. Guys, suck it up. You get a chip on you, fix it. Glue it together. You take care of something more precious and more delicate. The implication back then was, as brothers and sisters treating everybody equally, we weren't conforming to society. To get rid of that, by all means, men, treat your women well. Don't beat them. Don't abuse them. Don't use your manly privileges over them, like a lot of culture does. So when the world sees you and the way you live with each other, you go, wow, that's not what I thought about Christians. They're not these Bible thumping men. Women have to be silent in church kind of thing. That's not how he treats his wife. Maybe that's not what Christians are all about. These slaves, they're nowhere are they endorsing slavery. This is the world they lived in. And these slaves that are Christian slaves perform so much better. When Sunday school started up, Robert Raikes, Raikes Ragged School, he took kids that were in industrial England and showed them Sunday school lessons, and they got taught education on Sundays. They learned to read and write, became Christians. The industrial people realized those are better workers. These kids that go to Sunday school, they have better morals. They work harder, they're more diligent. They work as unto Christ and not unto the, and they hired them. They started paying for a public school system because those Christians were better than the regular kids. By your example, live in such a way that it quiets the quells against you. So how do wives treat each husbands? How do wives submit to husbands' authorities? All that. That part is very much embedded in cultural context. The symbolism behind that, women, how do you respond to your men? Men, how do you treat your women? That's universal. Live in such a way that those who criticize us will have nothing bad to say about them. I know about Christians, but I know this one couple, they're Christians, and they're not like that at all. You know, this other, they're not like that either. Gee, maybe my opinion of Christians may not be right, but the way the people live their lives, universal context. It's after 7:30, our hour is up. We'll pick it up. I'm going to this time We got to pencil. Last time I didn't pencil it, I wasn't sure where we started. Okay, we're going into verse 8 then, suffering for doing good, which is gonna be, if you have any homework, if it's time to do homework, we're doing homework, between part B and, by Betty Robinson, just like, between part B and B prime, which again, those chapters are chapter 1, verse 3, and chapter 2, verse 3, and chapter 2:11 to 5:11. Chapter 1:3 to 2:3, chapter 2:11 to 5:11. Outline in your Bible, or if you have that copy we gave you, circle it, highlight it. How many adverbs or adjectives describe Christians? Humble, submissive, blustery, obnoxious. Mark them down. We'll get together next time. How many words describe the Christians we're supposed to be? And we're done. So I'm going to stop the recording now because our hour is up. Stop the recording.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Anybody have any closing remarks, comments? You're free to go. We're not going to go any further in the Bible, but